in the meantime, we want to bring into the conversation our friend A.G. Gancarski, who we have relied on so much throughout the primary cycle. And of course, I've been saying all night, we're finally here. Voters, Republican voters, are making their voices heard for the first time this year, this night. Let's bring in AG to the conversation. AG, good to see you. We had to bring you on. You know so much. You have so much reporting about the DeSantis campaign specifically. And I want to put up on the screen here for our viewers. This was the DeSantis campaign response to the very early election call there. This is what Andrew Romeo, he's the communications director for the DeSantis campaign. He says this: absolutely outrageous that the media would participate in election interference by calling the race before tens of thousands of Iowans even had a chance to vote. The media is in the tank for Trump, and this is the most egregious example yet. You know, AG, I would be remiss if I didn't say or acknowledge this sounds a little bit like Trumpian language. Would you agree?
Yes, but usually you don't hear the Trumpian language right when the vote count starts. I mean, that's kind of the difference here. It's interesting that Andrew Romeo's leadoff was that became the narrative of the entire race very quickly. It's what the DeSantis campaign is going to be remembered for at the end of this. Whether he finishes second against Haley or not, that remains to be seen. But this situation it seems avoidable. It seems like he could have been more measured in his response. He comes off like a sore loser, and that's not good going to South Carolina and to New Hampshire, all of that. We knew Trump was going to get about 50% of the vote. What we didn't know was how the rest of it would break down, though. So, yeah, I'm surprised they made that the narrative story.
Okay, what are some of these DeSantis donors, surrogates? I've talked to a few. Have you talked to a few? How are they feeling at this point in the night there in Iowa? What's the vibe from the DeSantis camp right now?
It's not a good vibe because I think they expected to be more competitive. You had a lot of people from the state of Florida, lawmakers, agency heads, etc., going to the state to knock on doors that appears to have all been for naught. So they're not happy with this, and this is really his best shot because New Hampshire is at single digits in the polls. Nevada's a caucus that he says is rigged toward Trump. South Carolina, Trump's ahead. Haley's a favorite daughter candidate there. So this is really bad for his long range plan. His campaign's been saying it's going to be a long, scrappy campaign. But I don't know if the donors are going to want to back a candidate that can't win any of the first four states, because once you get through that and get into the Super Tuesdays and the contest where you have multiple elections, it's very hard to see a
Well,
path.
thanks for coming out to caucus. I'm proud to.
DeSantis is around 10-15%.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to take this result tonight and spin it into a victory or even any room for optimism.
You know, I got to ask, this is just out of curiosity myself here. Who's running the state of Florida right now? Because you have so many of these state officials there in Iowa. We spoke with the lieutenant governor earlier this afternoon. There's so many kind of state agency heads there. Are people in Florida scratching their heads? Is this a little too close for comfort, the official and the campaign? Help us make sense of that. I was just curious because sometimes you don't really see that.
Yeah, I mean, this is really close. And it's been something that you've seen people go from the campaign to the official side and vice versa throughout this period. DeSantis, after Joe Biden was elected, he very much took the office of governor and politicized it with an eye toward this White House run. So, with that in mind, he's basically politicized it where he's done everything toward a national audience. That national audience is not bought in, though. So you've got a governor who had political capital going into this race, coming out of this race is a little more uncertain. He's a lame duck. But yeah, this has been a real conflation of the campaign and the official side. You've got his main communications person is in Iowa right now. You've got the attorney general, the lieutenant governor. I think if anything serious were to happen to the state, it would either be the CFO or the agriculture commissioner who would actually be in charge of things. You've got so many people out of state right now.
Yeah,
Senate President. Yeah, go ahead.
I just thought it was somewhat peculiar as well. I wanted to ask you about it. E.g., Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa has staked a lot of her credibility and reputation in her endorsement of DeSantis here. DeSantis, whether or not he comes in second or third place tonight, what does that do to Reynolds' reputation, especially on the national stage? You hear Donald Trump go after her time and time again. And Ron DeSantis, and I'm paraphrasing here, he essentially said, if you don't kiss the ring, Donald Trump, if you're even a lousy Republican and you say something nice about Donald Trump, he'll be behind you. If you're a really good Republican, like DeSantis says Kim Reynolds is, but you don't kiss the ring, he'll disparage you. I'm paraphrasing, but that was what DeSantis said earlier today. So say DeSantis comes in second or third, does Kim Reynolds' standing diminish, not amongst Iowans, maybe amongst Iowans, but nationwide? Because she has been elevated to this national profile since her endorsement.
Yeah, this definitely is not going to help her. I don't know if it helps her in Iowa, given that a majority of the state's Republicans went against her endorsement, with DeSantis coming in at around 20%. But nationally, she's a moot point now. She was getting a lot of national play because she endorsed DeSantis, kind of the folksy sort of wisdom, sort of like Sarah Palin in 2008. People are talking about her being on the ticket, which made no sense, but it doesn't mean they weren't saying it. But, now she basically has hitched herself to a candidate that's gotten one-fifth support in the state. This tells me she doesn't have legs going forward. I don't know if she intends to run for Senate after Chuck Grassley is done, but to me, this suggests she's vulnerable. And if she does run for any other office, you can expect Donald Trump to agitate for her opponent or Donald Trump's children or whoever is the case at the time.
Yeah, there is this weird thing at play because, Trump goes after these very popular Republican governors who don't like Donald Trump, like Kim Reynolds, like Chris Sununu there. They're very popular in their respective states, but Reynolds and Sununu did not endorse former President Trump. At the end of the day, it doesn't seem like that's going to matter much at all. AG, back to some of the folks in the DeSantis campaign responding to the early call here. This is Brian Griffin. He's the campaign spokesperson. He said at the site where Ron DeSantis was speaking in Dubuque, people were still waiting to be checked in when the media started making calls. No one had even voted. It's extremely disrespectful to the voters. That's what he kind of quote tweeted there from Andrew Romeo. AG, I think it's important because, yes, news organizations make projections, make calls for elections. It's been happening since time immemorial. That doesn't mean the voting stops. The caucusing is still ongoing. Obviously, let's make that distinction. Let's reiterate that point. It's important, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, the media, the AP or New York Times, whoever is like doing the calls, is not calling the election. They're projecting a winner. It's a different thing. That doesn't disenfranchise people. The Iowa Republican Party are ultimately responsible for certifying these results. It is not any media organization. So that's sort of sour grapes framing. It doesn't really make sense. It's inconsistent. If you go back to 2022,
Yeah.
when DeSantis ran for governor, that election was called almost instantly because people did exit polls here in Iowa. News organizations did entrance polls to sort of gauge where people were at going into the caucuses. All of the passions with Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, they were the alternative candidates. But it was very hard for them to get traction. And I was just very surprised. I said this earlier, but I'll say it again. Just very surprised they immediately went there. But that tells me that they expected to do better than 20%. And they're looking for somebody to blame, but ultimately they have to blame their own operation. They took a bet going after Donald Trump, hoping that the media or somebody would wound him. That didn't happen. He went to all 99 counties. Ron DeSantis did. He did everything you were supposed to do: broker endorsements, tailor message to these people. It just didn't take. So ultimately, as the saying goes, Ron DeSantis' team failed to read the room, and now they're upset about what's happening with voter projections. But as we see, we've got about half the vote in. It's looking just like those projections were a couple hours ago.
Yeah, before we get to the projections, let's first, this is from James Uthmeyer, high up in the campaign there for DeSantis. He says, I spoke before approximately 400 Iowans today at a caucus site, and DeSantis won. However, they were getting news alerts of a Trump victory before speeches concluded or voting began. The media wants to taint this process, and it's sad for America. Wake up, everyone. Now, the caucusing began at 7 p.m. Central Time there in Iowa, AG. It's not like your average primary election where there's a cutoff for the vote time, but if you're still in line, you can vote, stay in line. You hear that all the time. You had to be in the room. People were in the room by that time, and the caucusing began. So no one's getting shortchanged here about casting their vote for whoever they want in the caucus itself. But the DeSantis campaign is going, maybe you agree, out of their way to call into question, the media who called the races, other outlets, other entities in the Republican Party, those in the Trump campaign, what have you. They're really going after the media. We have a live look there at the DeSantis watch party, but that's how these things work. Do you worry, though, it is going to be confusing for some of these DeSantis supporters and caucus goers? Will they understand that?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately they do understand it. If anybody is remotely objective about this, and paid staff is not going to be objective, they understand that, when you're inside the caucus site, you're not supposed to be on your phone. You're not supposed to be doing these things anyway. So it's up to the Iowa Republican Party to say we don't want outside interference in the caucus sites. So but ultimately the DeSantis team, they could have shocked the world with this. They could have used these early calls to say, send the media a message, vote for our guy. If they made those arguments, they aren't telling you about them. If they made those arguments, they didn't work. Ultimately, they didn't have a candidate to keep up with Donald Trump in 2024. And, all of this noise, all of this drama, all these aspersions cast at the corporate media and the familiar targets, they don't obscure the fact this is a 30-point race right now. And it's probably going to be 30 points in a couple of hours when all the votes are finally tallied.
Okay, so, AG, you and I were talking. A lot of people were wondering whether DeSantis could even break the 20% threshold. He's done that, or he's at least at 20. Let's put that up. Yeah, he's at 20 right now. So that was somewhat of a bellwether or indicator about how he would do, whether or not he can come in second place in Iowa itself here. But AG, you know this. I know this. I've covered Iowa before. The Iowa Republicans and Democrats, I mean, they're very politically attuned. They know how this works. They know that sometimes when news organizations have their projections and they can make the call, they make the call. Iowans are smart voters, are they not? It seems like the DeSantis camp is really, like I said, going out of their way to cast aspersions on the process here. And we talked to Jeff Kaufman, the chairman of the Republican Party there in Iowa, several times going up into the caucus. I asked him, were you worried? Are you worried and concerned that some of these candidates and campaigns will not accept the results of the election? Of course, we have to worry about that with former President Donald Trump. He did that after 2020. He did that after Iowa, the first go-around, when Ted Cruz won. But now it's coming from the DeSantis camp. They just don't like the rapidity with which the race was called here. It's kind of the same side of the same coin, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, there's definite parallels between Donald Trump's actions in 2016, which was a close race, which wasn't one that the media called, but was one that the count basically decided it at the tail end. And that's where, Trump objected. But comparing that to this, which is, it was so obvious what was happening that these media organizations felt they could call the race. They're kind of two different things. there was no amount of calling the race that was going to change the result on this. And it's especially ironic for DeSantis, given that, he said that he wasn't worried about the election results here. He said that in Iowa and Florida, elections were free and fair, and so on. So for him to cast aspersions on the Republican Party of a state where he has spent the last 7 months, it really is a bad look.
Yeah.
And I hope that when DeSantis gives his speech a little bit later, he sounds a little bit more ameliorating than his staffers do, because the staffers sound like Richard Nixon in 1962 after losing the California primary. You won't have Dick Nixon to kick around anymore. And that's just not where you want to be, especially if you're 45 years old. You're thinking you might want to run for president again, because in terms of Republican politics, Ron DeSantis is still a toddler.
Yeah.
You still got theoretically 3 decades left of runway. So, to sort of wipe out here in the first nominating contest, that's not going to make him seem serious to voters in this cycle or future cycles.
All right. AG, I want to put this up as well from our friend Fox's Jackie Heinrich, saying Fox Decision Desk that DeSantis and Haley are essentially tied at 10 p.m. Eastern. That was about 14 minutes ago. DeSantis is slightly overperforming some of the pre-election polling, so this could be because of his turnout operation. So the race for second place right now is too early to call. Live Now look there at the DeSantis election night watch party. And we're going to be speaking, AG, to Andrew Romeo at the top of the next hour. The DeSantis campaign communications director will get his thoughts, his reaction on all of this tonight as well. We are also learning as well, AG, that former President Donald Trump will be taking the stage there in about 6 minutes at 20 after. So we're going to keep this up. We're going to continue talking to you, AG, until Trump steps up there. If you have the time, we do appreciate your reporting there as well. Let's talk about the Trump-DeSantis relationship. I know this has been so focused on the Haley-DeSantis matchup. They're neck and neck for second place. They were on a debate stage there in Des Moines just last week, and they really went after each other. When all is said and done, when this primary process was over, did Ron DeSantis go after Donald Trump enough?
That's the thing. I don't know if he could have gone after Donald Trump enough. The last couple of weeks, he sharpened his criticisms. He said the things that people were hoping he'd say a year ago. And that's kind of the problem. I mean, he held it in reserve until he absolutely needed it, sort of a Hail Mary at the end of the game. His case was always on the slant against Trump, that Trump's not electable, that Trump can't serve 2 terms, that January 6th and other issues would be a complication, that DeSantis, his Trump policies out the drama. But the real problem that DeSantis ran into is that DeSantis has Trump policies, but without the personality. And this is something we've talked about before, and which is that Donald Trump is a rock star, and Ron DeSantis is more of a cover band. And that's sort of the problem that DeSantis had. You look at polling and you look at the crosstabs, and DeSantis is clearly the second choice for Trump voters, which is great if Trump is incapacitated, in prison, something else. But Donald Trump, he's still going. He's reasonably healthy, and politically, he's stronger than he's ever been in the Republican Party. So I don't think DeSantis could have made a case that would have dislodged Trump in the way that he needed to, and that was a fatal mistake.
So you just said as well that DeSantis is still in kind of the very nascent part of his national political profile. He's still young. So is this it? Say he doesn't get the nomination. Did he miss his moment? Say, circa Chris Christie, 2012, and other candidates? Or can he run again and get that same momentum in operation, say, in 2028? Or is there only a very short window? Can, political figures like DeSantis, do they only got one shot?
Yeah, this feels like a one-shot kind of candidate, sort of like Tim Pawlenty or Scott Walker, or people like that. The socially conservative governor who runs on his record, but finds that running nationally is a little bit tougher than beating people in a single state primary. I think that's where DeSantis ended up. You know, in 4 years, what does he talk about? Does he talk about Dr. Fauci some more? Does he talk about the war against woke? Does he talk about women's sports? I mean, all these issues that were really early decade issues, early in the 2020s. People got tired of them in 2023. I don't know if people are going to want to hear about this in 2027. And I don't think the donors come back to them. They wanted a fresh face this time. And when DeSantis took the donor money and then ran hard right, basically creating a product that the donors didn't want, you know, creating that opening for Nikki Haley to come in and take the more moderate Marco Rubio 2016 lane, you know, it was a fatal mistake because the billionaires don't need a middle class Republican politician. They grow on trees. There will always be another one. And Ron DeSantis believed his own hype, drank his own bathwater, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
But you know, he made the mistake of hubris, and I don't think he gets a second try at.
All
He's
right.
not Ronald Reagan in 1980.